Hello and indeed welcome to another Whiskey Review with me, the Whiskey Novice. Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining me. This is review number 119, part 2 of my latest series, looking at another 13 12-year-old Scottish single malts, the Baker's Dozen. And this time we're off to the islands, Highland Island, whichever you prefer, and up into Orkney for the Highland Park 12-year-old Viking Honour. This a whiskey I probably should have reviewed long ago, but you know, I'm there now. This is a whiskey. This is a malt that I would actually consider a classic. Now, what I mean when I say a classic, well, it's there's certain whiskies. If you think Glenmorangie 10-year-old, Glenfiddich 12, Talisker 10, those are also whiskies I would consider classics. Whiskies that are recognisable to those people who aren't necessarily whiskey enthusiasts, you know, who are just casual whiskey drinkers, buy a bottle every now and again. They still recognise that bottle because it becomes so well known. And this, for me anyway, is one of them. The Highland Park 12-year-old. Now, there's obviously been iterations of this over the years, and no doubt people will tell me that iteration was better than this iteration, and this iteration is better than, etc. But for now, we're just zooming in on the current bottling. Well, I say the current bottling, this is probably a couple of years old now, or certainly sitting on the shelf. So anyway, let's get into it. Yes, owned by the Edgerton Group there, the Highland Park up there on Orkney. This one is matured in, I think it's ex-bourbon. They say what I read was sherry seasoned casks, ex-European, ex-American sherry seasoned casks. So you're looking at ex-bourbon casks with something with sherry, ex-sherry in there in some shape or form. Yet again, I'm sure somebody could tell me the exact details of it. Been around a while. We all know it. The bottle has changed over time, but it's, you know, so 40% chill filtered, colour added. I'm convinced I heard somebody saying recently that this isn't chill filtered, but I couldn't find any proof of it. It was either that it wasn't chill filtered or there wasn't colour added, it was something, but I couldn't find any proof of that. There's nothing on the packages, there's nothing on the bottle, there's nothing on any of the websites I read. So we take it for granted that there's colour added and it's been chill filtered. Let's get into it, shall we? It's more sherry than I remember. It's been a while. It's been a while. And I'll get back to that later as well. There's something about this whiskey that, if I remember later, I want to mention. More sherry than I remember. But it's lighter sherry notes. You know, it's bottled at 40%. It's just light notes. But they play well with the American oak influence, and all together it creates a very rich toffee. And around the edges, you get the whiffs of sea breeze, and that then added to that, you know, almost turns into a salted caramel. Very nice. You know, a light orange. Some honey, heather. You know, it's a very pleasant note, very pleasant nose. A little bit of there's confectionery, and it's one very specific. Love hearts. I think they're maybe called something elsewhere, but we know them as love hearts. They're just the sweet, the candy with the heart on it and the little message in it. Yeah, because there is a nice fresh kick off this. It's, you know, it's relatively simple yet complex, and I think it's ABV that's doing that. You know, and I'll get to that later yet again. Let's get into the palate, shall we? It's a relatively thin, slightly bittersweet delivery. There's a creaminess to it. And that brininess is there again. The salt, the sea, the toffee. The salted, yeah, and it turns into that salted caramel again. And there's more of that orange starts to play through. And the sherry's there as well. Those light sherry palate, or those light sherry notes are there in the palate. It's a little more, because there is peated malt involved in this. So the peated malt sort of blends or balances the sherry notes out. So there's a slight, it makes for an almost creme brulee event where you can taste a slight bitterness of burnt brown sugar along with the caramel, so it makes for that creme brulee feel, and then there is a creaminess about it. It just, I think all in all, it feels a little held back. It feels a little pulled down. It feels restrained. In that, it's just that 40% ABV has been thinned to the point where there's still engagement with it, but it just feels as if it needs a little more. The peated malt is there. Definitely it is noticeable, but just a little, well, you know, it is noticeable. It is, yeah. And there is a fairly good balance to all this. The finish, it's quite long. It's not hot. It's not even really warm. It's that weirdly that peated malt, that burnt sugar again, burnt brown sugar. I'm going to say burnt, you know, the charred brown sugar, because it leaves a sort of metallic bitter tang going the whole way through that finish. The orange is still present. Yeah, actually it's not a bad finish, you know. It's not bad at all. I'm not going to add water to this. 40%. I did during my tasting notes, as usual. It just pulls a thin whiskey further down. It takes any engagement out of it. All in all, let's round this one up, shall we? Not to shorten it just because it's, you know, but I want it to get to, I just want it while I remember. This is always better than I remember. Will I replace this? Not immediately. It's currently sitting around here in the UK. It's at its highest end that I've ever seen it. It's around the £35 mark. When I was buying this, just as a sipping whiskey, as an enjoyable sipping whiskey in the cabinet, it was around the £25 mark. It's a 12-year-old single malt Scotch whiskey, so you know, 25 was cheap. 35, I think, for the whiskey you're getting is just a wee bit too high. So it's somewhere in the middle, £30. If it starts to come back down to that £25 mark, I will replace it. Right now, no, because for me personally, I've had this isn't my first bottle of this. I don't know how many I've had, but this is sort of progressing. The whole journey progresses. And for that £35, for another £10 or £15, let's face it, you're going to pick up a Glencadam 10, or you're going to pick up something with a lot more provenance than this is currently bringing. I know other parts of the world get at a slightly higher ABV. I know you'll probably get different iterations yet again, but we are focusing currently on just this one, the Viking Honor, and No, I wouldn't replace. I mean, I would recommend this to anybody. Anybody. I actually would say that everybody who's on a whiskey journey should have a bottle of this at some point. It's one that really, really should be in every cabinet at some point, for the simple fact that this wee bottle, Highland Park, to me is a wee journey in its own right, because it's got a bit of everything going on. I know there's the old chat about the great all-rounder and all that there. It's not a great all-rounder. There could be an awful lot done with this to make it better, believe me. But it's always just better than I remember. So the only reason I would replace it is when it's sitting in the cabinet, and every now and again I just want to reach for something light, but something that's got enough engagement to keep me interested. That you can't really deny this is good for it. I certainly can't, because it's got enough going on at 40% to keep even the enthusiast's interest, I think. And I think it's one of those that'd be a great one for introducing newcomers, that an enthusiast and a newcomer to whiskey can sit down together and both get enough enjoyment out of this one to keep the chat going, shall we say. I'm just going to leave it at that because I'm starting to blather. We'll move on. Yeah, definitely still one. If you're new to whiskey, yes, make sure to get one of these at some point. If you're an enthusiast and you've been around the block, you've had it, I would imagine. And well, we all have our views on these things, don't we? So you've had it. What do you think? Now, whenever I looked at this at first, whenever I was doing my tasting notes, my initial thoughts were, what the hell do I compare this with? What do I recommend to these good folk? Because it is a bit complex. It's a bit different. It's a bit off the wall. It's not run of the mill. But then I looked at my cabinet and the answer was staring right in front of me. And it's this, Ardmore Legacy. Yes, 40%, chill filtered, no colour added. But it's weirdly got a lot of the same elements as the Highland Park 12-year-old. It's got that wee peaty hint. It's got this, it's got that, but it just seems to be modulated slightly different than the Highland Park. So it becomes a whiskey in its own right. It becomes something quite different and something, yet again, quite engaging for a cheap whiskey, I find. So if you've had and I'm pretty much aiming this at the newcomers here, you've had your first adventure with Highland Park and you liked it and you wanted to try something a little different, what would I suggest? I would suggest Ardmore Legacy all day long. I would definitely suggest Ardmore Legacy, because it's that peat in there, that hint of peat that's balanced through it, mixed through, to make it not a peat monster, not a peat heavy whiskey, just a good sipping whiskey with quite a lot going on. Yes, I would. There you go with that one. That's Highland Park. It's been too long since, I've been reviewing too long now to not have done a Highland Park. It just slipped under the radar, hit at the back of the cabinet. Should have been in the last series, but I remember sidestepping for some reason. Yeah, definitely always better than I remember. On the nose, it's still, I think, a class whiskey. Get into the palate, it's a little thin, a little light. But nonetheless, engaging. There's the word for it. I'm going to move on, leave it at that, and say thank you very much for joining me. Thank you very, very much to my patrons. If you wish to join that group, the details are below. So they are. I'll be back next time with something else. Until then, my friends, here's to your good health. Cheers. Hey, thanks for watching my video. Please click and subscribe to be notified of further content.